Hello, welcome to another episode of the Practical Permaculture podcast. This week I'm chatting to Sustainable Holly. You may know her from her Instagram or her YouTube. She embraces permaculture so wholeheartedly, and it's really cool to see how she does that in an urban setting. I think you'll get some great tips and ideas from some of the things she talks about. So I hope you enjoy this week's episode. I also wanted to tell you about this season's sponsor. So I have the Botanical Bazaar sponsoring the podcast for this season. The Botanical Bazaar is a gardening and sustainable living festival that is held in the Gold Coast in Nerang. So this year it's on August 2nd and 3rd. I will be there this year doing an Instagram takeover on the day to show everybody what it's all about. But I would love for you to join me there on the day. So if you're interested in learning more about it or booking your early bird tickets so you can save some money, jump in the link in the show notes to learn more and book your ticket now. That's it for today's little intro. I hope you enjoy the episode with Holly. Let me know what you think in the comments, or feel free to shoot me a DM on Instagram and we can connect there as well. I'd be so grateful if you could subscribe to the podcast. It doesn't cost anything. It just helps you know when episodes are live, and it also helps get the podcast out to more people. It helps recommend it to other people who are interested in gardening, sustainability, and intentional living. Thanks. Welcome to the Practical Permaculture Podcast, your weekly dose of gardening, intentional living, and all things permaculture, served with a side of fun and plenty of great conversations. I'm your host, Alysse, and together we'll dig into practical tips, chat with experts, and explore ways to cultivate a more abundant, sustainable life. Let's get growing. Hello, Holly.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. So this week we have Holly from Sustainable Holly, her Instagram and social media and YouTube and everything that you do. You seem very, very busy online. For those who don't know you, do you mind telling us a bit about yourself and your context?
Yeah, sure. So I am Holly and I'm originally from New Zealand. I'm from a really small town in New Zealand, about 3 hours north of Auckland. And I grew up on a farm. I've been gardening my whole life. And now I'm in Perth and I'm still gardening, and I have sort of developed my gardening skills and the way that I garden very much from living in Perth, because it is quite an intense climate to grow in.
Yeah.
It's very hot here.
Yeah, I've had a couple people from WA that we've spoken to, and South Australia too, where it's like the dry heat where you don't get a lot of rain, and very different from how we garden on the East Coast.
Yeah, in some respects, I'm really glad that it's dry. I can't imagine living in a humid environment. But yeah, the lack of rain is really another big challenge with having gardens, is
Yeah.
trying to keep things alive during
Yeah, for sure.
those dry periods.
And so how long ago did you move from New Zealand?
Oh, it's been quite a while now. Probably 14 years.
Okay, yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so your place out Perth, how much space have you got to garden on there, or how big's the block that you're on?
So I'm in the suburbs. I have, I'd say it's quite a large block for, being, I think I'm only 15 kilometres from the city.
Okay.
And it's 720 square metres. And I have a pretty small house, which is smack bang in the middle of the block, which has been tricky because I just have so much front yard. So that's something that I have developed and worked on, is turned my front yard into probably my main gardens at this point.
Yeah, right. You're growing a lot of trees in there, I saw online. Your avocado tree.
Yes, my precious avocado tree. I started off planting a row of fruit trees along the whole front sort of boundary line, I guess, to add some privacy, because, my front yard was just bare grass, and so when people are driving by, there's just no privacy. And so that was my first real planting in the front yard. It was really overwhelming. I found it at the start, like such a blank canvas to know what to do with. So I started with that, and it's quite a wide block. So I think I had 5 or 6 fruit trees planted across the front, and I chose all semi-dwarf so that they wouldn't get too big and I wouldn't have to spend too much time maintaining them. But over time, that has exploded, and I have gone in and planted trees in between those. I've now got 4 raised garden beds, as well as an arbor to grow like a living shade over the raised garden beds. And then from there, I've just tackled little projects like one at a time, adding in a small wildlife pond. Nice. I've added in a new type of garden from scratch, where I'm like sort of experimenting a lot with that, with growing like more plants for mulch as well as for fruit trees. So it really has just developed over time, and I've added so much more.
And so is the front or the back north facing?
So the back would be north facing.
Yeah, okay.
So it has been interesting designing the front yard, because it does get shaded by the house in the late afternoon. Some places get shaded from midday, and then the sun sort of tracks around the back of the house. So that has been a really important factor. And because I didn't start the front yard for quite a few years, it gave me time to sort of figure out and really know where the light was coming, and how to manage that. Probably more so to try and maximize the shade, which I know for a lot of people that's not the case. They're trying to maximize the sun. But I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to provide shade for the front yard because it's just so hot out there. It's so dry.
Yeah, and because it's bare, I guess there's nothing, there's no canopy layer for anything that you're growing underneath.
Nothing, nothing at all. So establishing those trees obviously takes time, and that's something that I have really dived into in the last year is trying to work with other ways to do that, things that grow really well in the hot, dry climate, and just maximizing those on getting some quick shade up to then plant other trees underneath them to give them a bit of shelter, but then also using those trees to eventually cut down or prune back and add mulch so they can add nutrients to the garden.
Yeah, and will you use them as like green manure mulches, or will you actually put them in a compost and kind of use them? Or...
No, pretty much all of my trees and all my mulch plants are all chop and drop. Cool. Trying to just keep everything in that garden bed. I do have a little mulcher that I use to chip up some of the larger trees, and I'll lay down as much as I can fit in that garden bed, and then the extra I'll move to other garden beds. But I do try and just chop and drop. It's something that is really quick and easy, and also I feel like that tree has put all of that energy into growing. It sort of knows what nutrients it needs, and then when you're cutting it back, you can just give those exact nutrients back to the plant rather than like stealing it and taking it to another garden bed. I always feel a little bit bad. I'm like, I need to give as much back to that tree because it put all that effort into growing it with those specific nutrients. Because every tree and every plant draws up different nutrients. And I just think it's respectful to give it back to that tree.
That's such a nice way of thinking about it. And so what kind of things are you planting for your chop and drop and your green manures?
Some things lately that I've been really focusing on is Queensland arrowroot, which is an edible type of canna. not only because it is food producing, it produces rhizomes under the ground that you can use like a potato, which is like another form of food that I can have in the garden, but they just grow so quickly. They've got like a really hydrated stem, like a banana. If you were to cut open a banana trunk, that's sort of similar but on a much smaller scale. And they repopulate themselves. So one will turn into 30 very quickly. Yeah, right. So I can plant one in a row and then suddenly like come back a couple of weeks later and I have like 10 new plants. And so I can cut those down and just chop them up and lay them right there in the garden bed to feed the other plants. And because they repopulate and grow quite densely, they act as a really good windbreak as well. So I've been using them as a windbreak to establish smaller trees as shade. And then as those trees get established or plants get established, I can cut them down, let the light in, give them some space, but feed them at the same time.
Yeah.
So cool. That's probably been one of the main ones that I've been doing lately. But I have a lot. And I think also another strategy that I have is I plant very densely, like very close together, which started off more so because I wanted more fruit trees and I just wanted, I just got really into the fruit trees and I just wanted them all. So I was like, well, I don't need to get like the most optimum size tree. I don't need to have this massive apricot tree with hundreds of apricots. Yeah. I would rather have a small apricot tree, a small apple tree, a small nectarine tree, and just have that variety of fruit. So I went in and just planted things in the gaps that I would have left for the tree to grow to a sizable tree, and instead focus more on variety. And because of that, it does mean that it's important for me to prune them back a lot. Mm-hmm. So that just also gives me so much more green material, so much more nutrients to feed back to the garden by just having things planted a bit closer together.
Mm-mm. And so rewind for a minute. How did you first get into permaculture? We got carried away talking about our garden, but like, how did you find it? Was it something you were brought up with? Did you like read it in a book? Did it like pop up online for you? How did it come into your life?
So permaculture really, and the term permaculture came into my life here in Perth when I did my PDC, which I don't know. I was trying to remember when that was. I think it's about 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. That I did a 2-week PDC. And I guess that was really eye-opening, but it was also like clicked for me that is what very similar to way that I was taught to grow without even knowing it. So because I grew up in a small town, it was out, in the country. We were probably a good 45 minutes to an hour away from any supermarkets. We had a tiny little corner store. It was very much isolated. We didn't have cell phone reception. Mm. We didn't really have TV. So I spent a lot of my childhood outside. My dad was a farmer and also a fisherman. So there was no shortage of produce like that available. Mm. And my parents also had an amazing garden. So from before I was born, they had turned the backyard into kind of like a market garden, but just for them. And that was a huge convenience to not have to worry about always going into town to get produce. They grew a lot of their own food and they had fruit trees. And that also had come from my grandparents as well. So both, and this is on both sides, like my mum's family and my dad's family both were really active in gardening and growing food and preserving food as well. So it sort of is just generations of growth and gardening that I was able to be involved with and learn from. And so I was very lucky in that respect. And I carried that on with me. So like a lot of Kiwis, we tend to like leave the nest very early. So I left home basically as soon as I could, and moved into share houses. And every share house that I ever lived in, I had a garden. I grew tomatoes, herbs, whatever I could at the time. And that went right through, like, when I studied at university, I had a garden. And then when I moved to Perth, I lived in a tiny sort of like, that had been subdivided. So it was just a house on the back of the block with no garden. But I ended up getting my partner to build me a raised garden bed, and I had to have something. Yeah. So I just grew herbs and chilies. That was probably all I could fit in the space. But yeah, I basically haven't lived in a house without having a garden. Yeah. It's just ingrained, and it's part of me. I couldn't imagine not growing food.
A wonderful way to grow up and to have all those distractions of modern life taken away, just having that. It's wonderful. And so you've obviously gardened in a lot of different contexts and in some small spaces. A lot of the listeners are in urban situations. I know you've got a big urban block, but what are some of your tips for growing in an urban space and in smaller spaces?
Utilizing vertical space is something that I have always done. And whether you have even here at this house, I started with just 1 meter square raised garden beds, and not only growing in that 1 meter square, but also having on one side some sort of vertical growing space so that I could grow cucumbers or passion fruit, or just something that I could utilize that space, but also have the whole 1 square meter to grow other food, and just really utilizing layering and height. So putting low stuff at the front, the taller stuff in the middle or at the back, and probably, my whole life I've really just crammed things in. I'm all about high density growing, and that way I can start picking it and start using it as it grows. So if things are starting to get shaded out by other things, I just pick the leaves off and start cooking with those, and that lets light in, that leaves more space. And I have still done that, even though I have a bigger garden. I only have 4 raised garden beds still that I grow my main annual crops in. And I also utilize sort of the stages of growth, so I can plant things that grow really quickly, like radishes, while I'm waiting for bigger things like cauliflowers to grow. I'll just plant heaps of those little seeds in and then harvest those. And by the time, the cauliflowers are starting to take up the bed, I've already been, harvesting a lot of food out of them.
Yeah.
So just not wasting space on waiting.
Yeah, it's great. I think people get so caught up on the little back of the seed packets, the spacing guidelines. It's I think something that comes with experience as well, and understanding the life cycle of a plant and how big things are going to get, and your variety choices too. Like with cabbage, I planted cabbage last year, and I hadn't done it before because I'd never really had enough space. And I planted them as per the spacing guide, and they were there was so much room in between them. I probably could have planted them a lot closer. But this year I'm going to plant the mini cabbage variety as well, because I think that is easier to kind of harvest and will eat the whole thing rather than having to have a half cut up cabbage all the time and that kind of thing. So it's one of those things that just comes with a bit of experience, I think, as well, and lots of observation in the garden and being out there and constantly watching and seeing how things kind of interact. But it sounds like you have a big polyculture and lots of biodiversity in your garden. Is that important to you when it comes to pests and things like that?
Absolutely. I mean, I call myself the seed fairy, and I just sprinkle seeds everywhere. And because I now I save a lot of my own seeds, and so I don't feel so precious about them. I'm not, looking at this packet and thinking I need to plant them perfectly so that I can, get the most out of this packet that I bought. I save my seeds, and I have hundreds of seeds, and I just scatter them everywhere, and they're not all going to pop up because I'm not, planting them the exact right way, but some of them are going to grow, and the ones that do grow are going to be really strong and really resilient, and I just mix them all in as well, so you never know what's going to pop up. And because I do that year after year, if a seed doesn't grow, it doesn't mean that it's never going to grow. It just may mean that it just hasn't had the right temperature, the right a level of moisture. So there's seeds that I've scattered last year that didn't pop up that may pop up this year. So there's always things popping up on their own, and I love that. I also leave a lot of things to go to seed in the garden, and they just self-seed. So I pretty much haven't planted lettuce seeds in like the last 4 years, and I have lettuce growing every single year because I just let one go to seed, and there's lettuce seeds like growing in every garden bed, in the grass, everywhere. And like sometimes when I used to grow lettuce from seeds, like from a packet, I could never get them to germinate. I had like the most terrible success rate at growing lettuce from seed. But letting a lettuce go to seed, like you cannot stop it. It's just a force to be reckoned with. So
especially in a hot climate, they just bolt straight away.
So and that's the other thing is like if you get the timing wrong and they do bolt, then I just let them go and do their thing, and the seeds will pop up and grow when they think the timing is right. Like sometimes us trying to pick the right timing doesn't work, and they do go straight to seed, but that's where I just let them do their thing, and they'll pop up when they feel the time is right. And that often, nature knows best most of the time. So
I love that philosophy.
Like to let the garden go a little bit wild at some points.
That's awesome. You must be very good at plant identification when they all pop up, because I'm so paranoid when things pop up. I'm like, is it a weed or is it cosmos? I don't know. Like, what is it? And then I'm like, I'll let it get a bit bigger, and then I'll figure out whether I want it there or not.
It is, and that's something I just I have thrived on. I love plant identification, plant profiling, learning all the different parts of the plant, and that has come from just letting things go wild. And then sometimes I think back and I'm like, what did I plant? What could this have been? Like, what are the options here? Because sometimes they do, like pumpkins and zucchinis, they often look the same until they're bigger. And so I used to keep like a box of seeds, and I would, out of my whole seed collection, I would go and plant whatever and put those packets into a box, and so that I knew it could be something in that box. Like it wasn't, it eliminated, a lot more of my seeds because it's something in here. But now, as years have gone by, I know that is not true, because it could be something that I planted the year previous. It could be something that self-seeded. So really just learning and being patient, because you do have to wait for them to sort of get established. And even then, I have something growing right now that I have no idea, and I'm certain it's like a cross-pollinated thing.
I was going to say that.
It's like a whole new, I can't identify it. It's a whole new plant. It's it's really interesting, and awesome. I think I would like to save seeds from that as well, because it's a vining zucchini. So instead of growing like a plant, it grows more like a pumpkin and vines everywhere. And last year it grew like some little round zucchinis, which is unusual. Normally, like you're used to a longer zucchini. So I thought that was fun, but they were quite small. And some of them I didn't get around to harvesting, and the bugs ate them. And so I just let them mature on the vine so that the seeds would mature. And then I just buried it in the garden bed. So I have a lot of plants, and if I want to save the seeds from all of them, it can be like very time consuming. So one of my strategies is that I just bury them in the garden. And so I did that.
Cool.
And then this year they all popped up and I moved some of them around different places. Yeah. But yeah, this grew and it's got the same vining habit that the plant did last year. But instead of having little round fruits, they are massive and like a bit different in color and pattern. So I think that they have cross-pollinated with something else I grew last year. I've then buried the seeds and those seeds have grown into this new thing. Amazing. I don't even, some type of zucchini.
That's so cool. So how important do you think it is for people to try and grow their own food, whether it's just herbs or a few vegetables or maybe a lemon or a lime tree?
Oh, I think it's really important. I feel like when I was quite surprised because I have never really been a beginner gardener. I've always, been surrounded in people growing food. When I moved to Perth and I worked sort of in a corporate environment, I always was talking about what I was growing with the other people in the office. And there was a few people that were growing food, but there was a lot of people that had never grown food. And the questions that they would ask, like, how does a tomato grow? Like, does it grow on a tree? Does it grow on, like that, no concept of like what the actual plant looked like, And I just thought that was quite amazing because now there's a lot more people that are getting their fruit and vegetables from the store. And unless they're looking at this sort of content online, there's no reason for them to know how, what sort of plant that these foods are grown on. So I found that really fascinating. And I think it's something that is quite scary that's getting lost through generations. So I would obviously love it if more people were getting into growing their own food, and even if it's just on a really small capacity, to grow herbs and to grow chilies and cherry tomatoes. It's incredible to sort of go through that journey.
Yeah. And so I was watching your Instagram when you were planting out your front garden. Have you got any tips for when you do start a garden bed from scratch? Because it's a lot of people's first question, how do I get started, or what should I put in my garden bed, for it to be successful? And they often don't get over that first hurdle to even make it to growing food. So, what tips could you give around that?
Yeah, I mean, the fear of failure is real, and we, a lot of us suffer from that in all aspects of our life, and gardening is no different. I still have that as well to some extent. So it can be really hard to get started and to make decisions on what to plant, especially if you have not done it before or you just don't feel confident in it. And so I like to take things and call it an experiment. So everything in my garden is always an experiment. It sort of takes the pressure off it having to work and you having to get it right. So it gives you a little bit of mental freedom, I guess, in getting started. And I just the seeds are going to grow a lot better in the ground than they are in the packet. So if you're just sitting there not knowing what to do, not deciding on them, they're not going to grow. If you just chuck them in the ground, if you don't know how deep to plant them, you don't know, just experiment and just don't plant everything the same way. So that's probably one of my main tips, is to not do everything the same way. So if you're planting, say for example, like you wanting to plant tomatoes, don't plant them all the same, and you've got some tomato seeds, don't plant them all the same depth in the same location. Just spread them out different places, see what works, experiment, and you'll be able to sort of observe from there what ones did work, what ones didn't work, instead of just putting all your eggs in one basket and planting this row, and you may have planted them too deep or too shallow, and then nothing grows, and then you get really disheartened. So just taking everything with that sort of like playful experimental role, and trying different ways of growing. So I even to this day, I don't plant everything in one garden bed. So I don't have a garden bed full of lettuces or anything like that. I will plant them in every garden bed. Maybe some in a pot and maybe some under a fruit tree. Like just spread the risk really, and you can see what works and what doesn't work. It's just it's a really hard concept for a lot of people to do. They want to do it right, plant it in rows. Yeah, but what does it say on the packet? And I mean, I admire people that do that and have these, very linear gardens, but to me, it doesn't work for me. I find that harder. So
and it's great redundancy too. If one thing fails in one spot, you've got all these backup plants and that kind of thing. And so do you do a lot of record keeping then to try and remember how you've planted things so that you can go, oh, that's what was successful? Or do you just kind of remember it? Or
oh no, record keeping is not my strong point. I mean, I could tell you that I planted that one tree like 3 years ago and keep telling you for the next 5 years I planted it 3 years ago. Like I am not good at keeping a record. But I mean, filming and doing things on YouTube is a sort of forced record, and having those to look back on does help sometimes.
Yeah.
But I'm just a little bit more like, I guess, conscious about it and think about it, and just try and go with like similar like philosophies and ways of doing things. So I kind of, it's hard to explain, but I sort of like know my style now, so I kind of know what I would have done. And just experiment, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If it works, it works. And that's sort of the way that I do things. And I know a lot of people really struggle with that, and I find that with even now, people watching my videos and things like that, like a lot of people like to tell me that I'm doing things, I'm planting my trees too close together, or I'm doing this wrong. And I'm like, oh, really? Is there a wrong? Is there for who? It's wrong for who?
And in nature, they don't, space themselves out all nice and neatly in a row. A seed drops, and like you said, it's opportunistic. It might grow, it might not, and it just pops up. And we've got all these big gum trees, and we're letting some of the little saplings come up, like some acacias that have popped up. And some of them are so close to other things, and I'm like, oh, it's not really where I want you, but you're happy there, so I just leave them. So if nature does it, why wouldn't it be successful in our gardens, like you said?
Yeah, it is something that I used to struggle with. Like when I first started my front yard, I was very intimidated by the fact that like I thought that things were going to be very final. Like this, I'm going to plant this tree here, and no, that's it. That tree is planted there forever.
Yeah.
And I think from just being here for so long and not having unlimited space to grow things, I have come back now, and I am re-editing gardens and really learning that things, it's not final. Like, oh, that tree no longer serves my garden, and I'm removing it, or I'm moving it to another place because really it's too big for the space, or it's too it wants more sun, or it wants more shade, or so. I'm now at a point where I'm like going back and editing things that I have done, 5 or 6 years ago, and really learning and sort of like taking that on more, that things don't necessarily have to be final. Like you can move things. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, because we've got a blank slate where we are. Blank slate, inverted commas, there's always stuff here, but I've really struggled. Like I planted my garlic the first year, so we've only been here just a year, just over a year actually now. But I planted my garlic last season. I was like, yep, it's sunny. This is a great spot. It's going to be so happy. And then winter came and the sun dipped down. And I was like, yeah, they're not getting any sun here. This is so not the right spot. But if I didn't plant that garlic there, I probably wouldn't have looked at that particular spot in the garden, because we've got an acre and a half. So, there's so much to observe and take in. So now I know that, this part of the garden isn't great in winter for my winter crops that need a lot of sun. And so I'm relocating it this year, and I've learnt that lesson. But unless I made that mistake, I wouldn't have realized. But also it was like, it's just one season. It's just 1 year, like it's not a big deal. And even now we've put some beds in, because we had a machine that we had, so like we'll put the beds in, we'll just compost in there, and then when we're ready to plant trees we will. And the last 6 months we've kind of looked at it and go, yeah, that was a really silly spot to put those trees. They're not in yet, so it's easy to move the piles of dirt. But yeah, and some things were just like, it's roots in the ground, it's supporting soil health for now, and being able to get all those good microbes happening, and layering stuff in the garden. And it's not going to be forever, like you said, we are going to move it, but for now it's roots in the ground. And so it's helping kind of build our soil health and get us to that next point, because we have started with really poor soil that's been, a machinery's gone all over it. It's a new subdivision that they've made, and things have been ripped out, and it's been bare. And so yeah, but it's hardly any topsoil. So I think it's a really important first step for a lot of people too, to actually plant maybe pioneer crops, or to get something in the ground. Or we do the same with radishes, like you were saying. We put in some raised beds and just chuck radishes in there, because we want to just chop and drop the radishes and leave them to compost in place. So we just cut the greens off and leave the radish in there, and then just top it with some soil and plant in there when we're not quite ready for the garden bed, but we've got the time to make it, like in winter.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's really interesting, and people don't, especially beginner gardeners, don't, I think, appreciate or utilize that as much as they maybe could.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, there's so many things that you can learn just from planting things, and holding back and trying to get it right is, yeah, like you said, you wouldn't have even probably observed that space and noticed that sunlight if you hadn't planted there. And those are some of the best lessons, is just from doing. And you can read online, you can watch videos, and what I do in my garden, it might not work for your garden, because you have a whole different set of circumstances. And there's things that I've read online when I've gone to plant something and realized that done it, and then realized that that's not going to work in my garden, in my climate, or in my location. So even doing the research, you can still get it wrong, because it is sort of sometimes just up to that exact set of circumstances, that exact microclimate that you have in that space. So the only way to figure that out is by giving it a try and
do it. Yeah. What's one of the most rewarding things that you've found that has happened through gardening?
Oh, there's so many, but I think gardening like inspires me, and I love that feeling when you just you feel so inspired. It's a strange feeling. It's like really like excitement. It's pride. It's like a lot of things, and I just have always really treasured that feeling of feeling inspired. And so to be able to give that to other people has been hugely rewarding for me. And whether that is, talking to my mum, who also gardens, I'll discuss things with her, or like a new project that I'm thinking about doing in the garden. And that sort of inspiration and passion sort of comes out, and she takes that and she feels inspired. And then next minute she's built a better pond than me, and I'm still thinking about it. But I love that. I love giving that to other people, and that's probably the main thing that I want from my channels and from creating content, is to inspire other people to get in the garden, to just give it a go, and have their own real sense of inspiration, that feeling, because it's, I don't know, it's, to me it's amazing, and I would love to have that all day, every day. So I want to give that to other people as well.
Yeah, and gardening's such a community like that. People give and they share, and whether it's plants or seed or advice. Um, and we have like a few local gardening groups here, and it's just so nice. It's such a nice way to connect people. And you meet people from all different backgrounds and, walks of life. But that gardening is such a common goal for a lot of people. And I find that gardeners are often foodies too, which makes me super happy because they love cooking with all the stuff in their garden.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there anything that you grow that's a bit unusual?
Oh, at this point, nearly my whole garden.
It's just one big experiment.
Yes, I have evolved over the last few years to really enjoy unusual things, rare fruit trees.
Yeah.
I love finding new types of fruit trees that I have never heard of or never seen. And I, especially not having access to be able to get that fruit in the stores and in the supermarket, that's something that really inspires me as well, is I want to grow these things and have access to them. So I have expanded my fruit tree collection wildly in the last probably year. And
how many do you think you have?
I have a list.
Oh, okay.
And so I do not, well, I have a list of varieties, not like if I have multiple of that variety, I haven't noted that down. So, but I'm about 200 varieties.
Oh my God. How do you fit them all in?
Very closely.
Wow.
So I guess another thing that I have started doing is multi-grafting.
Oh, yeah.
So,
cool.
And that comes from my two things. One, I love learning about gardening and I love to expand my skills and my knowledge. And so grafting has always been something that I would love to learn. And I have now done that. I'm still experimenting in that and trialing and having many errors, but some success as well. But that just really allows me to expand the varieties that I'm growing without planting more trees, which I'm at the point now where like I don't have space to be planting all these trees. So going through, and I mean, I have one of everything at this point, more than one of everything. So I can start multi-grafting, adding, different types of apricots and nectarines and apples onto other trees. And that's just another way to be able to get more out of a smaller space.
Yeah.
Because I'm not focused on a huge abundance. I don't need to have like baskets and baskets full of oranges because I mean, really, in our household, it is two of us, and half the stuff I grow, my partner doesn't even like anyway. So I don't need to have that huge amount. I would rather have a different variety and also stagger that throughout the year. So by growing different varieties, you can get an early season, a mid-season, a late season, and so I can sort of fill in the gaps so that I can have fruit available every month of the year.
Yeah, nice.
So that's something that I'm working on, and yeah, it's another way for me to collect fruit trees.
Do you net your fruit trees or you just leave them?
It depends what they are. We are starting to get more and more issues with fruit fly, with the Mediterranean fruit fly. So I am bagging, because a lot of my fruit trees are still small, I can get away with just bagging individual fruits. But as time goes on, I will need to net the trees as they get bigger. And then also we have neighbourhood rats as well, so they don't care about nets or bags.
Yeah. Oh, wow. What is one piece of advice you'd give somebody who's just starting out on their gardening journey?
I think my biggest piece of advice is to start small, start with one project at a time and really just experiment with that. I think it can be really overwhelming when you look at a space and trying to decide, what to put there, what fruit trees to put there, what raised garden beds to put there. So I have tackled my whole gardens one project at a time. and tried to do it. It just can be really hard to do, but to try to do it from start to finish, and not worry about getting it right. Just, this is my idea. I'm gonna do it, and then I can move on to another little patch or another little raised garden bed, and then by the time you've done that, you can go back and look at the first one and see what worked and what didn't work, which is the best way to learn, is by trial and error. So just taking things into small little projects, I think is a really good way to do things, to not get overwhelmed, because it is hard especially when you're really passionate, or whether it's a new hobby or we get very excited and overexcited and want to go all in. I'm going all in. And I'm so glad I didn't go all in. It means that I still have a little bit of room to play with. It also means my style of gardening has changed over time. And when I first put in the front garden, I put in 4 raised garden beds. And you could start with 1 raised garden bed. And when I put in the 4 raised garden beds, a lot of it was on, that was quite a big project. It's also expensive to do. So that was my capacity, was 4 raised garden beds. But I'm so glad I didn't put in more, because at the time I was really passionate about growing vegetables, but now that would mean that I would have less room for fruit trees, which is a new passion. So I'm also conscious about that, as although I have a little bit of space left, I haven't gone all in and taken all the space up, because I want to leave room for new projects and new passions to evolve. So one little project at a time.
That's a great way to look at it. I definitely need to take more of that in, because I just start all these things and then I'm like, oh, what do I finish now? And that's now overgrown and I'm terrible.
It is really hard when you just have that passion and you want to get stuck in, but it can be very a little bit detrimental in the fact that if you don't follow it through to completion and you move on to something else, it does get overgrown, or it just doesn't work how you wanted it to work, and so then you don't want to look at it and then and it can be really disheartening, and it can slow down the flow and the enjoyment in the garden. So I find it very difficult to do, but one little project at a time.
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on and chatting to us today. I got lots out of this, and I know that all the listeners will be getting so much out of it. To follow you and to see more about what you do, what's the best way? On Instagram and YouTube?
Yeah, whatever type of content you like. I post YouTube videos. I try to do that once a week. I also have Instagram, and then also I have a website with articles and recipes, as well as you can sign up for a weekly newsletter on there for Tuesday tips. So there's all ways, depends on how you like to get your content.
Well, I'll put all of that in the show notes so people can find you nice and easy.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on.
No, thank you for your time.
All right, see ya.
Bye.